The following is a presentation of the Healthcare Facilities Network.
Hello and welcome to the Healthcare Facilities Network. I'm your host, Peter Martin, Gosselin Martin Associates. As always, thank you for clicking on this video. This is episode 2 of Talk Finance and Build a Relationship with your CFO. Episode 1 has already been released. I'll have a link to it at the end of this episode, so if you haven't watched it, please do. You know, when we started the Healthcare Facilities Network, this is the type of episode that we envision doing, because it brings together a Director of Facilities Management, Robert Hacker, his CFO, Jim Corwin, at the same table. And those of you who work in healthcare facilities management or who have worked in healthcare facilities management know how important the relationship between your Director of FM, your Manager of FM, your people in FM, and that CFO is. The CFO has the checkbook, but the CFO isn't always attuned with what FM is doing. And sometimes FM doesn't keep their CFO apprised of what they are doing. So it's a critical relationship that is not always intact on the facilities level for a variety of reasons. And this is why we're excited to bring you this episode. You know, I'll just tell you, one of the difficulties is always titling episodes. Not a big fan of doing it. And this one was particularly difficult because Jim and Robert touch on so many different themes, and we had originally envisioned it as more of a finance type episode, but it quickly evolved into something a little bit different, and obviously you let it go that direction, because I think what it did, you know, as I look back on this episode, both of them in their entirety, there are so many keys that these two gentlemen offer to developing that relationship between these two critical departments. And so as we were thinking about naming it, it was really difficult to, you know, it wasn't exactly a finance episode, and it wasn't, you know, a relationship episode. So we came up with Talk Finance and Build a Relationship, which are kind of two, you know, they may not be in perfect synchronicity with each other, but I think both themes are exhibited in here. So it was a fun episode to do, and again, I think that it is just so critically important of a relationship to have. All relationships are important these days in the work environment, but with your CFO, it is even more critical. So I thank Jim and Robert for appearing on this particular episode. We'll do more of this in the future, because again, you know, we can talk about finance, and we can talk about budgets, and we can talk about that. You know, not all healthcare facility professionals are comfortable doing that, because it hasn't always been a skill that was needed maybe when you were coming up in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, but it is really important now. But if you can't build that relationship first, then it doesn't necessarily matter how much business acumen you have, excuse me, or finance acumen that you have. You need to build the relationship too. They both go together. You can't have one without the other. And so with that, I am going to click over to us for episode 2 of Talk Finance and Build a Relationship with your CFO. And as always, thank you for clicking on this episode, and have a wonderful day.
Well, the industry doesn't recognize infrastructure for some reason. They only focus on the direct care, but there's very rarely money. There are some things in the cost report that have been fading and shrinking that have some consideration for that. That's why my number one thing is to track my cash flow and start with my debt service. And then I have to generate a certain amount, not I personally, but as a system, we have to generate capital for Robert. And right now we haven't been doing that. We've been meeting our debt obligation, and we've had a few bucks left over that really have gone to replace equipment. So, I mean, my goal is to get us to 40, 50, 60 million a year in extra, because Robert could easily consume. If I gave him $50 million, he wouldn't waste it. He would use it and do a ton of stuff that needs to be done that's going to really start crumbling. I mean, I'm more worried for the finance guy and the engineer guy 15 years from now, because we're really going to hand them a very dangerous infrastructure because we did our best to keep it running with what we had,
Yeah.
but nobody considers the kind of capital you need to run a hospital. And that's where I think, if I had to say there's probably a biggest failure right now in the funding of healthcare, it's the lack of consideration for infrastructure to support the process.
Wow. Have you always focused on that, Jim, in your role? And I mean that as a compliment. You're just
Well, it's funny. I mean, I started as a capital accountant, so that may have kind of, because then I always partnered with Robert's position, because Robert often is not only in charge of fix and repair and central plant, but usually the big construction projects. He's got to have a deep hand in, because all these third party people show up on our site and start going, hey, we can do this and that. And Robert has to say, no, time out. You don't understand. You don't understand the distance to a power line or this or that. So, he's engaged. But I noticed that when I was a capital accountant, I just marveled at the facilities position. I think it's one of the most important positions in your health system, is a top-notch facilities people, and really the people they get underneath them, because they need really a very diverse team, because at some point you get tired of plumbers, I'm sorry, I was going to say a bad word. You get tired of plumbers messing stuff up and overcharging you. And after a while, Robert just goes, I'm going to hire a plumber. I'm going to hire a painter. I'm going to hire this.
Yeah.
But it's just insane. I'm actually quite surprised our hospitals are still, some of our buildings are still standing.
Robert, what are you were talking about revenue streams and what you follow now? Typically, like census, is patient census a good barometer to base cash and the solvency of a hospital on, from your experience?
Absolutely not. I think that's the old school thinking. And you'll hear a lot of old CEOs, administrators talk about heads and beds.
Mm-hmm.
How many heads and beds do we have today? That really doesn't tell you anything, because if you're losing money on a per patient day on a basis, and all of a sudden you have a lot of those patients, you're losing a lot more money more efficiently. Or do you have a mix where, hey, you know what, we're just at the break-even point, or we're actually making money? So, when I hear people focus on, oh, the hospital's full, there's some good financial aspects to that. And I can go back, and Jim knows this just as well. When the hospital becomes full, it becomes more efficient at processing people through. There's a natural push and pull effect. Yeah. You want that to be in place. When the hospital's not full, there's not necessarily the natural incentive to move patients through at a rapid pace. Not that I'm taking quality away from it, but you know what? It's almost lunchtime. I will get to that task when I come back from lunch, whether that be something as simple as their discharge meds, education before they go home, the social service visit, those things. If, hey, that bed's ready to go, we have somebody waiting in the ED to come up, they might actually go ahead and do that before they take lunch, understanding that it goes. So that sometimes makes the flow a little bit faster when it gets to be full. But you've got to manage it. And this is where I say that the new breed of CEOs coming into hospitals is different. They're starting to really understand the actuaries and understanding what risk really is, where they hadn't had to before. Prior to 1983, when DRG came into effect, everything was cost plus. It didn't matter what it cost us. We just build it and then we put a profit on top of it. So you couldn't lose.
Well, yeah, I mean, here it is. I always caution, when I was at Providence, they always wanted to build. Oh, we're impacted. Let's add 50 more beds. Let's add 50 more beds. The problem, Peter, is that next level of impacted volume, this is where it really is terrible, Peter, because the community needs it, right? But right now, impacted volume is only no pay or low pay Medi-Cal. There's not the next level of Blue Cross patients impacted and can't get into your hospital. It's always low paying business. And so I've always used to get pressured to do performance. We use our core payer mix. We're going to add 100 beds, so we're 30% this, 20% that. I go, no, because that next 50 to 100 patients is all going to be Medi-Cal and lower pay. So I recommend we look at it from that perspective. But people want to grow and do these projects, and that's where I've seen health systems make bad decisions, because they just say, build it and they will come, but the payer mix is bad. Our Medi-Cal has grown from 12% to 20%. Now that doesn't sound, a lot of people have worse than that, but that's 8 points on 12 points. That's a 75% increase in Medi-Cal. That kills us, and the Medi-Cal payment rate's really low in California, although they're starting to talk about bringing it up. And that to me makes the most sense. Right now, we should be investing in the lower paid patients, because if you keep them well, Peter, you're going to be so much better. If you could take a low income Medi-Cal person, get them in touch with a care provider before they get sick, I guarantee you'll save a ton of money. You'll keep them out of the hospital. That's why I like getting that premium where we have doctors and clinics and we have outreach people. So that's a big project I just worked on, is working with a managed care health plan to get us about $9 million of funding strictly for well care and quality. We haven't done that in the past. We've always just tried to negotiate our rate and say, hey, give us 8%. No, we'll give you 2, go 7, 3, that kind of stupid stuff. I'm trying to get money for quality on the clinic side so we can keep these people out of the hospital. Sorry, Robert, I know you had a comment.
Hey, Robert.
Now we're starting to change more from a hospital and a episode of care to trying to keep them out, which makes us sound much more like an insurance company. We're starting to think and act like an insurance company. It's cheaper to take care of them in the clinic setting versus the high cost hospital setting.
So you and I have talked about this a bit, Robert. Let's say that, so you're director of FM. Suppose there's a director of FM who's listening to this and saying, this is all well and good, love hearing about the payer mix, but this doesn't impact me. Why does it impact them? Tell them why it impacts them, and why you need to at least be a little bit cognizant of the payer mix if you want to be successful as a director today. This is Peter Martin. If you or your organization is interested in advertising or partnering with the Healthcare Facilities Network, including sponsoring content, then please email me using the barcode in the lower right of your screen. From the trades level to the vice president level, from planning, design, construction, project management, compliance, safety, and security, the Healthcare Facilities Network reaches FM people where FM people are. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think it's in my opinion, and this is what's important to me, when I understand what's happening with our system, or whether it's our system or anywhere else, when I start to see where the problems are, where the money's coming in, and the effects that it's going to have on me, I can then actually go back to our CFO and I can come to Jim and say, hey, Jim, you know what? We're thinking about building this new clinic. And there's a lot of buzz around it. And I'm like, I can build it. And, do we have an ROI on it? Do we know how many patients we need to see? It's not my role necessarily, but I need to be able to come back to Jim to say, hey, I'm going to spend $1 million building this little clinic down the street. Are we sure that's the right thing to do? To make sure that all the players are there and that we're thinking about it, just like I would do for anything else. Hey, we've got a boiler down. Is it time to replace the boiler? It's a business case. And everything we do now kind of resolves around a business case. Does it make sense for me? I'm going to replace a 20-foot section of pipe, but I know that I've got 100-foot section that's running down above, a critical area. If one section is going bad, we know that the rest of the pipe is going bad. Do I go ahead and replace all of it, or do I replace only that 20-foot section? So I need to have that confidence that when I come to Jim, I say, Jim, I have a problem with the chiller. I need to replace a chiller. Or, you know what, I've got 3 old elevators. I shouldn't say this out loud, but I know I'm being recorded. I've got one elevator that's been down for 4 years.
Yeah.
4 years. And, guys, it's about $350,000 for me to get that elevator modernized. But that one is not as important to me because it's in an older building that that elevator doesn't necessarily serve patients. It serves some of our staff, and I can deal with issues with our staff a little bit easier than I can with patients.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I come back to him and I said, I have these 3 other elevators in our MOB that's a higher priority for me. And so what I believe is when I come to Jim and say, hey, here's really my priority and where it needs to be, he knows that I've done my research and he knows that I've done my critical thinking to come to him. And I think that bond, that relationship going back and forth is important, because otherwise I can just throw my hands up and say, hey, you know what? I need to do it. And if it's not done, you just said no, so it's not my fault.
Yeah.
I think, Peter, to really follow up on that, it's less, I think the challenge is when you're in facilities management that you think, I don't impact the number, but that's not Robert's job. Although Robert will actually give us some revenue ideas, but he's rare. But if you understand it, you're the only one that understands the condition of the facility in the next 5 years. So if you know the trend, you may say, Jim, we're heading in an upward trend. I can stall this for a little while. When do you think you'll have cash? I'll tell him here. He goes, that'll be good timing. I could do that bigger repair. So then that'll change the way he might just do a smaller fix to drag it out till some funds come in. Or he might do the opposite. He goes, Jim, we've been flush with cash for the first time in a long time. Let's do a couple of big things right now because I see your payer mix is going down and there's not going to be as much available cash in 3 to 5 years. So let's do something right now, because we don't do it now, it will never get done. So it's less I can impact it or anything, but it's if you have that awareness as an FM, you can guide me on what it is. And the key is I have to trust that role. I think the worst thing is CFOs have this weird relationship with facility managers because you just want to spend all my money, and it's actually almost more often than not adversarial, which is going to kill the whole health system. If mom and dad aren't the same page, family's going to crumble. I think that's one of the biggest relationships in the health system, that if it's functional, you're going to be in as best shape as you can be. If it's dysfunctional, and I'd love to hear from other facilities managers, because I've never seen a lot of facility CFOs.
Right. Well, that's kind of part of the reason why I asked you that question. Relative, have you always been this way? You mentioned the word infrastructure so many times. Like, well, very impressive. Let me ask, not so much with Robert, Jim, because it sounds like you guys have a strong relationship there. But based on your years of experience with Tenant and with Providence, how, in your eyes, does the facility director, the facility manager, build credibility with you to be able to get to the relationship that you now have with Robert? How do they build credibility?
For one, Robert reaches out, whereas most facility managers won't. So I would always do the outreach.
Okay.
I would build a trust factor with them. And I would tell them how we're going to have a great working relationship and how I can help you. And then my goal is to help you. That's what I'm here for, because we have 2 things: keeping our facilities running and taking care of the patient. Those are the 2 biggest things we do. The challenge I have is that they'll say, well, I got marching orders from a COO, or they'll circumvent it, or they'll come up with their own way to finance stuff. Oh, I got this guy to put this off way down here. He's going to change it. So when they don't partner with my role, I go, Stan, I remember, I won't say his last name, he was a good engineer too. Guy knew his stuff, but he always circumvented the advice I would give him, and it was strictly advice, but I'd always, and I'd be in his office all the time. Stan, I was just there yesterday. You then went ahead and did this. Well, the COO said it had to get done. I go, well, then bring me and you and the COO in, and let's talk about a way to do it that can afford it, because we don't even have a capital budget for this, and corporate's not going to allow you to go over here. When you're part of these health systems,
Yeah.
it's literally draconian in nature. I mean, the one thing I hated working for health systems, I honestly felt like they were trying to fire me every day. And after a while, I just developed a thick skin. Robert worked for a lot of health systems, big places, but it's that circumventing. Why would you, they're used to that adversarial relationship with the CFO. That's going to do nothing but hurt the entity. Now, a lot of it too comes from the CFO. Okay. So sometimes the engineer guy just has to go and slap the CFO and say, look, I'm on your side, but you got to communicate with me, and I'm not just some drunken sailor looking to spend all your money. Okay. Cause that's really what a lot of CFOs act like, and that's not the case 85 to 90% of the time with these facilities managers. They have real problems. They have an infrastructure that almost can't be upkept with the amount of cash we have. That's a real problem that's systematic. It's worse in California than anywhere else because there's no money in this state. But we've got to stop that madness. And this pairing is probably almost more important than the CFO and the COO in some ways, because the COO is getting one FTE for $100,000 and Robert needs $10 million. So yeah, you can partner with the COO all day long, but if you don't have a good relationship with facilities management, you're going to be a lesser CFO. Period.
Robert?
No, I agree. It takes time to develop that relationship. And it takes time to be honest, to say, you know what, I would like to do X. And a lot of my peers, we would all say, hey, we would love to do certain things. We would love to have, a robust computerized maintenance management system and have a whole team that's sitting there, not only making sure that everything's done in a timely fashion, that we're also getting data out of it that we can actually drive some decisions. But sometimes we can't afford for those analysts to be behind the scenes. Is it more important for us to have that analyst there, or that clinician that can actually see a patient in a clinic setting to try to help bring in that revenue? And so sometimes we have to give a little in order to try to generate that revenue for us to do the secondary things that we want.
Do you find, and I know we're coming up at the end, do you find, is it more difficult these days, and this question goes to both of you because you both sit at these tables, is it more difficult today to say no to clinicians, to doctors, to these people who come at you, these groups that come at you and say, hey, we can make more, because there's so much pressure to make money, right? They come up, and everybody's got ideas. So they come to you with ideas on ways to make money, which they may be well-intentioned, but you gentlemen are responsible for the implementation, the actual dollars. Is it more difficult now to say no, to hold people off, or are pressures different today than they've been in the past?
Well, I mean, let me start off is those pressures have always been there from MDs. I think one of my single biggest roles is to develop partnerships with doctors and explain to them and say no to them in a way that they understand. Because I will tell you, doctors are stubborn, they have all these great ideas, but if you say something to them that makes sense, you can win them over. So I think the problem Robert and I have had is I'm just heading into my 4th year. I've been there 3 years, and our facility had developed some bad habits, and they couldn't say no. And it's one of the reasons we're in some of the difficulties that we're in, because we just didn't say no. And I don't really say no. I say, let me tell you why that's going to be a challenge to do today. And I make sense. And then I can really tell what a doctor's made of, because if he just says, you're just missing a golden opportunity. Or if he listens and say, you know what, now that I hear your situation, maybe I can even partner with you. And you know what, get me just this piece of equipment, and then just get me this area to practice in. And that's where Robert comes in handy on the space. And then can we shoot for this, and let's time it out. So is it different? No, doctors have been the same for 50 years. I think the challenge is they become more sophisticated in some ways and can respond back a little better. So it's a huge challenge, but that's our single biggest responsibility, is to be able to have those tough discussions. I've said more than my predecessor. My predecessor liked to stay in his lane. He was a really good CFO, but he really didn't like to. He let the administrators and stuff deal with the docs. But I say, no. I managed 900 doctors for 12 years, man. I'm gonna, 2008 to 2020. I'm gonna step in there and explain to them why the answer is no. And it really shows if they're the kind of doctor we want. I've got one doctor, I'm saying, that's a partner we don't want anymore. They have no interest in partnering with us. It's all about partnership. So, Robert gets the byproduct of that, because all the heat goes on the CEO, the CFO, and the COO from the MDs. And I like the fact that we've got our new CEO, I think, is a little more inclined to not say no, but not say yes, which is very important.
Right. Robert, what about your perspective?
I think being in this field close to 30 years, there's certain things, the pressures kind of come and go. And it depends upon, I hate to say it, what's actually happening with society. You know what? Boilers are going to go, chillers are going to go, pumps are going to go, infrastructure. We've got an older building, 50, 60, 70 years old. We always talk, we should tear it down and build a new building. Great. That's going to cost, a couple $100 million. But do we have the money to do it? It's impractical. We know that we can't do it. We do this in our life every day at home. We can buy a new car, we can buy a new house, but we might not be able to afford it. And we make those decisions. But at work, sometimes we throw that away. And I say, you know what? It's not up to me. It's up to Jim. Jim, I need to do this. You go find the money for me and figure it out. So both Jim and I had a CEO that we worked with before who went to head up a children's hospital. And I remember when he went there, he said, it was going off to his retirement job because no DRG in a children's hospital. And what happened his first year he got there, DRG was implemented for children's hospitals. And he's like, I'm back to the 80s again, trying to cut costs and try to figure out where you can actually make a profit. And so the more efficient I can make the building, the clinic, the better off we are as a whole to make that money. But I think the same pressures are there that there's always have been. Do I think the doctors are getting smarter in how they ask for things? Yes, because even within the facilities world, we have seminars at the ASHE conference on how to ask for money, how to write business cases, how to talk to your CFO, how to talk to your COO, how to talk to your CEO about money, how to ask for it, giving templates on how to write things.
Yeah.
You know, it was all about how do I get versus how do we make this work? Because there's multiple ways of making it work. You know, I look, for those of you who are a little bit older, the old Sears, good, better, best, the three different tiers. Good is okay. You know, it will get us there. It might not be perfect, but it'll get us there. You know?
Peter, I'm going to keep it simple to wind up.
Yeah.
Be honest to your CFO, because I hated facilities guys that says there's no other option and stuff. And in my 26 years, I had seen other abilities to do the same thing. So be honest with them and tell him, we can get by, we can fix this, but I'm telling you, Jim, 2 years from now, you're going to have big, big, big problems. Okay, so, and it'll be way more expensive to fix then. So help him understand the magnitude, and don't tell, because I'm not an engineer. Okay, so you can buffalo me if you want to. You know what? You can BS an honest person. I'm an honest guy, so I trust my you guys have huge roles, so I trust you implicitly. You can mislead me easily, and I'll have to take your advice. Just don't do that. But at the same time, lay it on me. Don't hold back,
Yeah.
because I'll have to figure it out at some point. So build that relationship with your finance leadership. Be transparent, be honest, and challenge them to help you. Help the facility. Challenge me, put me to work. You know, that's why I get paid a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, you know, but be honest, I just used to hate facilities guys when I knew for a fact you're just blowing smoke up my, you know what.
Well, yeah. You wrapped it up really well, Jim. I was actually going to say, you know, this could easily be a class on creating that relationship between the director of FM and the CFO. And, you know, if you said one word that's going to come out of it, like in my eyes, realism, right? Just, you got to
that's
be real with
perfect.
each other, you know, and if you're not, none of that other stuff matters. If you can't
Yeah.
trust. So this was
100%. Well wrapped up, Peter.
anything. This is a great discussion, Jim, Corwin, Robert Hacker. Anything we didn't cover? I know we got to get rolling. I kept you over a little bit, but any final word?
No, I just personally, I'm so glad you're doing something like this, because this is something that's rarely talked about. I don't hear this when you're in the boardroom, when you're in the XYZ, when you're in a senior leadership management team. You know, too often the facilities person isn't as engaged. Now, Robert gets a little more engagement than most, but it's still not enough. You know, this is an understood, discussed, and addressed issue and relationship. And I'm very impressed that I'm even having this discussion with anybody, because I think it's a great discussion, man.
Well, yeah, and when I asked Robert, you know, hey, why don't we do this kind of finance 101, building the foundation? And we didn't build as much of the foundation as I wanted, because we got off on a great discussion about creating a trustful relationship. But he said, hey, how about I'll ask my CFO if he wants to appear? I was like, that would be fantastic, because you need both of those perspectives, because at the end of the day, it's going to come up through you eventually, right?
Absolutely. And if any of your constituents, if they feedback, I'm perfectly happy to answer any questions, give any guidance. I have no problem with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Jim Corwin,
You bet.
Robert Hacker, thank you for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it.
You bet. Great
discussion.
meeting you, man. Great
Yes.
guy.
Thank you, gentlemen. Peter Martin
Take
from
care.
Healthcare Facilities Network. Thanks for watching. We'll be back.